Camelot. The entire nation absorbed it. A golden pair walking over a marble floor for 1,000 days, the First Lady wearing a pillbox hat, and the attractive president. We were all yearning to think that force and elegance could coexist in one bed without the porcelain cracking. In the first year, the porcelain cracked. What the country purchased, while the century's greatest romance unfolded. It's more of a standoff than a romance, just behind its own front door. Ambition, religion, wounded ego, and a father-in-law who priced the union as a corporate merger tied these two individuals together. Before the honeymoon plates cooled, she was aware that the boyfriend had cheated. He was aware that she was aware. They both continued to smile for the cameras, because they ultimately owned the cameras. The story of this part of American history should be told in front of the lights. Not the fairy tale. A widow conned us out of her sorrow, nor the condescending supermarket tabloid version. However, the more difficult object was positioned beneath both, a marriage that failed 3 times. Through sheer determination, it clawed its way back, and discovered a semblance of tranquility about 11 weeks before a gun in Dallas destroyed it. Get a drink and take a seat, because the pain this narrative causes is justified. May of 1952. A 22-year-old debutante with a camera-ready grin and a French vocabulary that could cut glass was seated across from a rising congressman at a dinner party in Washington, hosted by Charles and Martha Bartlett. The Bartletts intentionally played matchmaker. Jacqueline Lee Bouvier's Catholic upbringing and aristocratic refinement caught their attention. They concluded that the aspirational John Fitzgerald Kennedy needed that particular item on his arm. More than each of the young individuals, one guy desired the match. Kennedy, Joseph P., the father figure, the bootlegger, became an ambassador, the entire dynasty's puppet master. Took one look at Jackie and calculated her value as if she were a rare masterpiece being priced by an accountant. The speed with which elderly Joe picked up the math is documented by biographer Sarah Bradford. The girl was proficient in French, had real cultural significance, and covered the ostentatious new money Kennedys with the kind of traditional respectability that their wealth could never fully purchase. Jackie's mom shied away when she saw the same family. In contrast to her own meticulous lineage, Janet Auchincloss thought the Kennedys were noisy, rude, and utterly commonplace, and as a son-in-law, she seldom met her preferences for nearly anybody else. At least on paper, the math worked both ways. Kennedy needed a spouse who would be able to support a future president without faltering. Jackie also sought a way out of her mother's constant worry about money and matches. Somewhere in that mixture, love flickered, and it was genuine enough. On all sides of the table, however, cold calculation also took place. Recognize Jackie's pre-Kennedy persona. She was fluent in Italian, Spanish, and French. Skillfully sketched. She had a real job as a Washington paper's curious camera lady, wandering about the Capitol to take pictures and ask smart questions of strangers. Her taste and armor were refined during a year of study in Paris. The soothing voice was often underestimated by men. They figured the attractive debutante didn't follow any of it, but she allowed them to file away all they disclosed. More than anybody at that first supper could have predicted, that practice of observing, documenting, and providing virtually little would characterize the future of the marriage. Jackie herself entered with unclouded eyes. She was drawn to JFK's charm and intelligence, but she was equally concerned about his image as a womanizer. She wrote to Father Joseph Leonard, an Irish priest, in January 1953, months before any ring, outlining the worry that would plague her for the following 10 years. She expected her husband to follow in the footsteps of her own adulterous father, a man who was eager to chase and became disinterested as soon as he succeeded. He would show that he was still capable by flirting with other women, and who would be angry with the wife who saw it? Her mother was almost murdered by the same trend, in front of a daughter who was observing. Nevertheless, she wed him. The proposal itself vanished into folklore. While Martin's Tavern in Georgetown maintains that it took place in Booth 3, Boston's Omni Parker House maintains that Kennedy proposed at Table 40. Only the timing is agreed upon by historians, who shrug at the location. Kennedy proposed shortly before Jackie left for London to cover Queen Elizabeth II's coronation for the Washington Times-Herald. She immediately stopped, traveled across an ocean, took a picture of a queen, and only agreed when she got back. On the 25th of June 1953, The engagement was officially announced. St. Mary's Church in Newport, Rhode Island, the 12th of September 1953. Jackie imagined a tiny thing. A small group of friends and relatives attended a private Catholic service. A private woman's lifelong ideal wedding. A coronation came to old Joe's mind. The patriarchs took control of the day and turned it into a rally for their cause. The chapel was full with 700 people. The reception at Hammersmith Farm was packed with 1,200 additional people. The Auchincloss estate with a view of the sea. Photographers flocked to every angle. A tiny army of strangers paraded the bride, who begged for closeness. Witnesses, who were close enough to observe her, recalled how exhausted and shaken she appeared under the weight of everyone's intense gaze. Before the cake arrived, the message did. The private lady in this household would never decide how to live her own life. They were selected for her by the computer. Before the champagne even lost its sparkle, the chosen one was dressed in immaculate white, and the picture was submitted directly to the morning papers. That afternoon, she wed the man. In addition, she wed the company that was behind him, and there was just one chairman in charge of the company. Jackie joined America's most bizarre sports cult after getting married, Hyannisport's Kennedy compound. Competition was palpable throughout. Imagine a shy person who enjoyed French poetry, horses, and long silences, abruptly transported into a boot camp operated by boisterous, aggressive, sunburned overachievers who treated a section of beach grass like a battlefield. The Kennedys were always in motion, screamed political disputes over dinner while playing football at full speed. Rose Kennedy, the matriarch, had strict protocols that controlled every minute of the day. The family interpreted your inaction as a sign of weakness. You might as well submit your resignation if you lose a game. Jackie, who was more interested in a peaceful horse and a book than anything else, explored the area like an anthropologist, trapped in the midst of a group that was always yelling. Rose Kennedy dominated the home front with the devotion of a mother superior and the rigor of a drill sergeant. She used index cards to record mealtimes. At the dinner table, I asked the grandkids questions about current affairs. Shed demanded that all married women follow a rigid Catholic schedule for having children. Jackie, who treasured her solitude, was irritated by the house's ongoing surveillance. Where loneliness was considered a little betrayal of the tribe, and doors were seldom locked, Jack, on the other hand, provided minimal protection. He could never quite understand why the lady he married kept shying away from the tumult he had grown up in. During one particularly vicious game of touch football, her sister Lee Radswell witnessed Jackie break an ankle, and the injuries gave her the one thing that money could not: a doctor's justification to skip the entire ceremony. She accepted it with gratitude. The well-known statement that Jackie called the clan the Gorillas most likely came from later biographers who were looking for color, because historians find it difficult to link it to her real mouth. Her recorded insult fell cleaner, but cut softer. She dubbed the Kennedy sisters the "Rah-Rah Girls" because of their unwavering enthusiasm, a moniker that embodied the same contempt for boarding school that her family already sensed in her. Their early decision was stated clearly by Arthur Schlesinger Jr. The new wife was perceived as a snob. The fairy story curdles here. JFK's infidelity did not develop gradually over time. Soon after the wedding, it exploded almost exactly as planned. And it didn't stop till the afternoon he passed away. In the same manner that other men gather stamps, the man gathered affairs. Additionally, the roster reads like a mid-century American fever dream. For many years, Ben Bradley, the editor of the Washington Post, was surrounded by Mary Pinchot Meyer, a painter from Georgetown, and his sister-in-law. Judith Campbell Exner shared a bed with both Chicago crime leader Sam Giancana and the president. A detail that, for whatever reason, remained hidden for years, but was explosive enough to overthrow a president. Next came 19-year-old Mimi Alford. The 2012 biography, Once Upon a Secret, written by a White House intern, details an 18-month affair that took place within the mansion itself and is unapologetically confirmed. When examined closely, the tales about Marilyn Monroe that every Barstool historian recites mostly vanish. The whole interaction was attributed to a single, quick encounter in 1962 by Robert Dallek and other meticulous researchers. Later, the tabloid writers turned it into a full-fledged opera. It never deviated from the routine. Jackie was well aware of everything. yet that didn't alter the expression on her face. Ben Bradley's 1995 autobiography, A Good Life, is perhaps the most chilling example of that information imparted on a standard White House tour. As she glided past a young employee called Priscilla Ware, also known as Fiddle Jackie, she turned to face a Paris Match reporter who was strolling next to her and said in French, "There walks the young woman rumored to share my husband's bed, with the bland serenity of a woman giving a weather report." Without a spark, she continued sailing. Why should I swallow it? Jackie's tolerance is presented by Sally Bedell Smith as a sort of aristocratic agreement made long before she ever met a Kennedy. Powerful men strayed in the world she came from, and a breeding woman put up with it as long as it didn't lead to public shame. She could tolerate a personal betrayal. She couldn't write a headline for the top page. Despite his recklessness, Kennedy understood that line just as well as she did, and for years, he barely managed to stay on the safe side of it. The marriage repeatedly buckled beneath the weight of all those women, without completely breaking. The deal cost her more than she ever revealed to outsiders. She withdrew into a tiny group of confidants who were aware of the situation and kept it under wraps. Friends saw how she tensed up whenever a young, attractive secretary entered the room, and how, during the years when the affairs were most intense, her humor became a little harsher. She never hurled a lamp, never set up a scene, and never gave the reporters a crack to snoop on. Beneath the calm, however, a silent accounting continued, and each new betrayal added a new entry to a ledger that she would only make a firm decision on the man's death. Beneath the glitz, the world never saw the marriage's medical horror. JFK had a spine that tormented him every waking moment, and Addison's illness was a hormonal condition that the family kept as a state secret. He almost died as a result of two risky surgeries on that spine, the first in October 1954 and the second in February 1955 at a hospital in New York. When infection struck both times, a priest performed the Catholic last rites twice, but the obstinate guy refused to comply, passing away. Jackie took care of him, read aloud to him, lifted his flagging spirits, and supported a family already preparing for a funeral during those dark months. Years of regular distance never brought the two of them closer than the catastrophe did. For a while, the marriage truly breathed, but it was one of those horrible intimations that only disaster seems to orchestrate. Then biology betrayed them once more. Like a second bloodline, concealment ran in the family. Jackie learned the art of the cover-up up close during those hospital vigils, and the Kennedys concealed Addison's diagnosis from both voters and media, since a president's weakness ruined effective campaign material. She fully understood the lesson after witnessing a machine conceal uncomfortable realities under press releases and happy photos. Years later, long after the guy at the center of it could no longer refute a single word she selected, the same storytelling skill would provide her the means to reimagine her marriage in the eyes of the public. The marriage would finally be crowned in the summer of 1956. After losing a previous pregnancy to miscarriage in 1955, Jackie carried this one into the last weeks, and a healthy baby appeared to be within reach. Meanwhile, her husband was floating on a hired boat off the coast of the Mediterranean, with Senator George Smathers pursuing his kid and anything else that occurred to float past the railing. Jackie gave birth to a stillborn girl they named Arabella on the 23rd of August, 1956, in Newport. The father made a decision that destroyed the marriage after learning of the loss from the deck of a hired boat in the Mediterranean. He just continued sailing at first, let the glamour of mythology fade from that. After weighing his vacation against his wife's sadness while she lay in a hospital bed, the guy decided to take a 3-day holiday. In his oral history, Smathers subsequently stated that he grabbed Kennedy by the figurative collar and yelled at him to get his ass back to his wife if he ever wanted to be president. Use language to deal with that quote. Long after the event, historians consider Smathers' cinematic language a self-flattering reconstruction. Smathers loved a good narrative, especially one in which he was the hero. However, the delay itself is undeniable in the record. Jackie and the others filed the wound away in silence after Kennedy returned home 3 days later. That August, something inside Jackie solidified forever. The girl who had previously spilled her anxieties onto a motionless priest now knew, coldly, exactly what kind of marriage she was in. Throughout that fall, the couple's acquaintances anticipated the news that never came, and the divorce lingered near enough to taste. Whatever held her in place over those depressing months, faith, tiredness, unadulterated ambition, or the straightforward math of a woman with frustratingly few decent exits in 1956, resisted every temptation to go. She stayed and saved the bitterness for a future confrontation. The marriage utterly collapsed after Arabella. Throughout the latter months of 1956, friends of the marriage often and publicly whispered that Jackie was seriously considering divorce. One of the most enduring tales in the Kennedy canon that Joe Kennedy called his daughter-in-law and offered her $1 million to save the marriage, and his son's aspirations of becoming president rose into that void. It crumbles the moment someone looks at the documentation, even if it plays wonderfully on screen. The narrative was maintained for decades by sensational biographers like J. Randy, Tara Borelli, and Edward Klein, but no trust document, financial record, or living witness ever emerged to support a single dollar of it. The whole affair was dismissed by serious historians like Arthur Schlesinger Jr. and Robert Dallek as tabloid legend, a tale that endures because it satisfies our need for a cynical old villain to buy love with a checkbook. When Caroline Bouvier Kennedy arrived healthy and squalling on the 27th of November, 1957, the real turning point was reached. JFK, a serial philanderer who viewed commitment as an optional accessory, was ambushed by fatherhood and melted around his daughter with a compassion that no one in the family could identify. As a first-hand witness and his secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, saw Jack's overt devotion to Caroline rebuild a shaky bridge between him and his wife. After the previous year's tensions subsided, a useful alliance developed that was stable enough to get them both through the 1960 campaign. For a few periods, the porcelain appeared to be nearly whole once more. Even though the ceasefire was in effect, no one would mistake it for permanent. In less than a year, the affairs returned to their previous pattern, subtle enough to save the marriage another open wound, after Caroline softened her father without changing him. Instead of forgiving, Jackie recalibrated. She built just enough personal space to make the whole situation palatable while accepting a spouse who loved his kids and deceived his wife in approximately equal proportion. By the time the 1960 campaign engulfed them, they were less like newlyweds and more like partners in a difficult, high-stakes business that was kept together by the children, their common desire, their religion, and a tacit understanding that neither of them would ever publicly acknowledge. Instead of uniting them, power allowed them to establish distinct kingdoms under one renowned roof. On television, Jackie was the perfect first lady, a whisper-voice legend who rebuilt the White House and so completely overshadowed her husband in Paris that he quipped that he would go down in history as the guy who traveled to France with Jacqueline Kennedy. The two of them circled one another off-camera at a measured, cautious distance. From the first week, she detested Washington's fishbowl. She regularly ran away to the couple's rented home in Middleburg, Virginia, to breathe. There, she rode horses over the hunt country and allowed the presidency to fade into a far-off rumor. She traveled far from him on long, glamorous excursions, most notably to Ravello, Italy in the summer of 1962, where she spent weeks with Gianni Agnelli, the heir to Fiat, while the newspapers back home sharpened their pencils. Imagine the divide for a moment. While the real husband and wife arranged separate travels across different countries, the public consumed romantic fantasies and sent fan letters to a pair they imagined laughing over breakfast. Reporters took pictures of Jackie on Agnelli's boat and wrote flirtatious comments, and JFK sent his wife a stern reminder to spend more time with Caroline and less time with Gianni, a directive brimming with the audacity of a man who slept with half of Washington. After all, the dream kept the voters satisfied, and satisfied voters kept the entire system going, so neither of them cared to alter the fantasy. In the meantime, her spouse relied on chemistry. Because the two of them had different habits, Dr. Max Jacobson, often known as Dr. Feelgood, gave him a lot of vitamin injections that were severely laced with amphetamines. When you combine the two, you blur the line between chemical dependence and the occasional awful week. JFK relied heavily on those needles during the darkest moments, while Jackie's were infrequent and strictly restricted to certain high-pressure situations, such as the punishing 1961 Paris summit. As a political duo act, the White House marriage operated on compartments, dazzling the cameras, spectators, and foreign heads of state with their immaculate syncing. They lived in parallel as a private couple, appreciating one another's skills and sharing a bed less and less. Jackie reportedly told her friend William Walton how little she planned to do for the public. She vehemently refused to be the first woman to park herself at the White House so that everyone in the nation may stare at her. The two of them were eventually broken by a casket, not a scandal. 5.5 weeks ahead of schedule, on the 7th of August, 1963, Jackie gave birth to a frail baby at Otis Air Force Base. The couple called him Patrick Bouvier Kennedy. His hyaline membrane disease-ravaged lungs were unable to perform the basic function of breathing. The baby died on August 9th, 39 hours into a life that had never once achieved stability after doctors hurried him to Boston Children's Hospital. The extent of it was never realized by the nation. In private, the parents surrounded one another in a shared mourning that ultimately overcame 10 years of cumulative harm, while in public, the administration accepted the loss and moved ahead within days. After years of protecting her heart from a spouse who repeatedly broke it, Jackie finally let down her guard. The couple came out of that disastrous summer clinging to each other with a closeness their friends had long since ceased anticipating because loss did what happiness could never. When Patrick passed away, JFK's decades-long practiced charm came free. Clint Hill, a Secret Service member whose first-hand recollections are considered gospel by Kennedy academics, witnessed the president disintegrate in the hospital, his shoulders heaving, his face moist, and a man sobbing with not a shred of act left in him. After 15 years of marriage, grief finally succeeded in bringing the two of them together. In her oral history from 1964, Jackie described turning to Jack in the hospital and admitting the one concern that now loomed over all previous grudges. The one blow she could not withstand was losing him. Almost none of the White House aides anticipated seeing the images that they noticed that autumn. The president and the first lady walked hand in hand, lingered close to one another, exchanged kind glances, and went about their daily lives with the ease of two people who had finally, and at great cost, come to love their spouse. The calendar gave them very little time to enjoy that serenity, and the cost was quite high. On the 22nd of November 1963, a gun tore up their hard-won tranquility after 11 weeks. In the blazing Texas light, the motorcade passed past Dealey Plaza. The president was fatally hit against his wife as rifle fire erupted throughout the square. Jackie's first response, which was recorded on camera forever, caused her to scramble atop the rolling limousine's trunk, either groping for a piece of her husband's skull or searching for a way out in sheer animal terror. Clint Hill threw himself into the back of the automobile and heard her cry, which he subsequently repeated in front of the Warren Commission while testifying under oath. Her husband was murdered, and she held a piece of him in her own hand. Jackie firmly established herself in Parkland Memorial Hospital and refused to move. She told the physicians that she intended to remain by her husband's side until the very end, defying every polite command to leave the trauma room. Then came the time when intentional imagery replaced unadulterated fear. She was forced to alter the plan by aides and Lady Bird Johnson. Before Lyndon Johnson took the oath on board Air Force One, Jackie refused to get out of the pink Chanel suit, drenched in her husband's blood with such anger that the entire record was altered. Think about how much control that choice required. A gunshot ripped through her husband's skull only inches from her face hours before, splattering bone and flesh all over her lap. In a dark room, any average individual may pass out in shock and ask for clean clothing. Instead, Jackie did some math. She realized with a clarity that should terrify anybody who studies it that the picture of a blood-soaked widow standing next to the new president would become ingrained in the nation's mind and never fade, and she deliberately decided to become that image. Depending on the witness, the precise phrases she selected changed slightly. Almost soon after the audio diary was recorded, Lady Bird Johnson recalls a quiet, hurt statement about letting the world know what she had done. It was eventually refined into the form that became legendary by Kennedy advisors like Kenneth O'Donnell. The angrily expressed desire for them to see what they did to Jack. In each case, the instinct beneath was dazzling and icy. Wearing her skirt like armor the whole journey back to Washington, a lady drowning in new agony realized in real time that the blood on it would implicate an entire country and canonize her husband. In an interview with journalist Theodore White a week after Dallas's passing, a distraught widow sought a Broadway show and gave America the information that would put an end to the whole unpleasant situation. Camelot. She deliberately created the myth. She sealed the tapes for decades and began reconstructing her own marriage in real time while attending a series of oral history sessions with Arthur Schlesinger Jr. in the spring of 1964. When you listen to those tapes, which were finally made available to the public in 2011, you see Jacqueline Kennedy playing the part of a lifetime. Disappeared. The affairs disappeared. The White House years were an emotional Siberia. The impending divorce following Arabella. Her spouse chose a boat over her anguish for 3 days. A modest 1950s lady sits in her seat, recalling a marriage of perfect harmony and insisting that she got all of her thoughts directly from her husband. Two individuals who, according to her meticulous account, were in complete agreement on everything. From the first minute to the end, the performance went perfectly. She portrayed herself as a submissive servant who existed solely to showcase her husband's genius. A portrayal that is so different from the astute, vigilant, iron-spined lady her friends knew that it is essentially footnote-filled fiction. The Schlesinger tapes are today viewed by historians as a widow's last campaign, conducted with the same sense of image that took her through Paris, Parkland, and Dealey Plaza, rather than as a biography of her marriage. She concealed the impending divorce and kept the relationships under wraps. What she created, on the other hand, withstood all competing accounts and solidified over 60 years into the narrative that the whole country continues to tell itself about a marriage that virtually no one saw from the inside. She was an artist when it came to lying. When you realize what she accomplished, the entire narrative is turned upside down. The greatest effective act of self-mythology in American political history was accomplished by the woman we portrayed as the innocent victim of the Kennedy machine, the mistreated wife, and the ornamental First Lady. Jackie managed his mythology, while her husband's men ruled the nation, and her business proved to be far more resilient. Just as she had planned, his indiscretions vanished into footnotes. The stillbirths, surgeries, and humiliations vanished into a gentle shimmer of pillbox hats and cello music. This is the actual love story, which is everything but a postcard. It is not a fairy tale of a golden pair, but rather the grim, often violent marriage of two arrogant individuals who hurt each other for 10 years and only turned to affection when death started to circle the house. She made it through his treachery. Jackie endured his operations, 2 of her children's little coffins, and her husband's murder while she was kneeling near enough to have blood on her hands. Then she accomplished what the powerful Kennedy machine was never able to. She rewrote history and carved her version so deeply that, even after 60 years, the majority of the world still recites hers rather than the truth. Jackie constructed Camelot, brick by brick, out of the ruins of the worst thing that had ever happened to her, even though it had never existed as anything more than a phrase a widow had taken from a musical and welded onto the bloodiest chapter of her life. Weigh every personal betrayal and cold calculation against the illusion she created about them, and judge the marriage as harshly as the complete record permits. The agreement was sealed by the woman.